Hello, dear subscribers of my channel, of Alexey's channel. We are streaming live again. Hello, Alexey. Good evening. Thank you, everybody, for subscribing. Do not forget, please, to click the like button. That helps us tremendously, as neither Russia nor Ukraine very often are supportive of our channel for obvious reasons. So, as always, we are back with you every week, and we have a ton of questions coming from you. We'll try to dig through them at the final part of our stream. You can also leave questions for Alexey in the closed Telegram channel, and you can leave, obviously, questions underneath this stream at the bottom. If there is anything that you would like to be asked, we'll forward it to him. So, QR codes, again, some housekeeping. The QR code next to Alexey is the link to his School of Thought, School of Communication. New modules, new seminars, communication is available there. And the QR code next to Alexander is QR code to support his channel. And as usual, the question for the stream today: what dish do you think will be presented at the feast of the strong countries of this world, whether it will be Ukraine, Russia, or China? So, do you think, Alexey, or I'd rather, let me ask you this. Do you think Ukraine as a dish, which table is that? Oh, I think it's the big buffet. Whoever wants to grab a piece, they just come and grab a piece of it. That's my opinion. All right. Those who watch us live, you have a chance to vote in this live voting thing. Side note from Privateer Station, we're translating the stream a few days later, so usually this voting is already gone, but you can still make your own mind. All right. Again, in Ukraine, they're warning about massive attacks from Russia. A week ago, they warned again of a similar attack, and they were hit with Oreshnik, that multi-headed ballistic missile from Russia. And reaction of the international community was somewhat lackluster, although they are trying to gather the Security Council of the United Nations, probably would not lead anywhere. In Ukraine, there are different voices. Some are saying this is for hitting Russian oil tankers. And Zelensky, in parallel, is saying that he's expecting Trump to do something. Trump, meanwhile, is busy all over the world, from Cuba, Greenland, Venezuela, to his hand in Iran. There are actually, you can see some protesters appealing to him with a lot of slogans saying, "Trump, help." And it seems like he really doesn't care about Ukraine too much at this moment. He's too busy with Iran and other distractions. What do you think may happen in this period with Ukraine? How valuable do you think Ukraine is to the United States at the moment? And Trump, who was somewhat violating international world order, did he lose the interest to Ukraine? Oh, of course not. No, Alexander, he has not lost this interest. Simple indicator is that he allowed or pushed forward the voting for project by Lindsey Graham to slap 500% sanctions on anybody who is purchasing Russian oil. So that voting should happen in the near future, and this is a significant step forward. And he did mention, by the way, that Putin is getting on his nerves. He's tired of Putin BS. So this is a serious estimation. I think everything is on its course in relation to Ukraine, so nobody canceled or changed anything much. The other thing is that the United States is a big country, and of course they have to react to a lot of different things, including Iran. And as I mentioned in our last stream, the United States started a strategic campaign against China, to a minor degree against Russia, but mostly against China. And Iran is a significant link chain in Chinese network. So if Iran falls, Iran regime falls, then the axis, how did they call them, the axis of evil, Moscow, Tehran, Beijing, and Pyongyang, that breaks apart in the most sensitive and rather important link. And this will be a big change, not in the favor of the global south, so to speak. So if ayatollahs are removed, who can take power? Probably a Shah, that is, or his descendants, the family that are still in London. How many years ago were they pushed out of the country into exile? About 47 years ago. So they've been patiently waiting. And they will get, of course, a huge advantage as a country, United States, that is, in splitting this axis. And it will not be in favor of those who are intriguing against Israel, of course. And it will seriously weaken China and its politics. So United States, they're well aware of what they're doing. Cuba and Greenland, they're of course good topics too, but United States understands the vector that they need to pursue. And this is the claim to Iran is to the other hemisphere that United States supposedly are not too involved with right now, but as we see, they somewhat are. These are links of the same chain, so they are related. All right, Alexey, it's of interest to me, personal interest. What do you think about the story of protests? Understandable that the official power gathered some anti-Maidan in Iran, and they were burning in the same fashion the portraits of Shah, portraits of Trump, to show that picture in contradiction to the protests against regime. Internet is not really running there, so it takes a big delay for these images to come in. They did suppress a lot of, most of the internet capability in Iran, and even Musk's satellite communications didn't quite work. So, by the way, another interesting question, whose technology was that? Chinese? Because Iran, I don't think, has this technology. Russian or Chinese? And how do you think it will affect ballpark? Do you think it'll change the regime? Yes, Alexander, I think the regime was shook. They already had several high-level generals killed during the protests. Of course, 2,000 plus people were killed during the protests, among the protesters. And the other thing is that, of course, Iran has been going through these protests as a cycle. Mass protests that last for months and do not conclude in anything fruitful. On the other hand, it's almost like clockwork, right? They don't happen every 2-3 years by themselves, I think. I think the West is playing a longer game here, and this is one of the key stories with Iran. It's a strategic story. So if it doesn't fall, doesn't change the regime this time, it likely will shake again in a couple years. So this regime of Ayatollahs was there for 40 years. Even if it exists for another 10 before it falls, that's still a success. That it falls at the end. Plus minus a couple years, doesn't matter. It'll weaken China as it goes anyway. Another record-breaking military budget planned by Trump. What for? Well, of course, for the peace in the whole world, right? Quite as expected. So there are some panicking statements by some weak souls that the protests are diminishing, that they were trampled because Trump fails to intervene, because he's too busy with other things. But we'll see. I think there is a huge probability that there will be some military action on Iran, whether visible or covert. Again, one story of states will hit military installations or nuclear program, whatever remains of it. We'll see that in a couple of weeks. I think next Monday we'll be able to discuss what has happened. If United States are indeed aimed at changing power in Iran at the moment, you will observe the strikes against the political structure, and you will see additional aid coming to support the rebels, the crowds of people who are surging to the streets in protests of Ayatollah's regime. You might see some very well-spoken persons among the crowds with good training who will help to organize them and lead them in necessary directions. We'll see that. What do you think, Alexei, about China? Why are they so weak in responding to Trump's attacks? And Venezuela that was bitten off, and Greenland. China is very diplomatically reserved. Is it because they have some pre-agreements, or because they have nothing to answer, no way to answer that, to counter that? Well, China is also dependent on trade with the United States. They are dependent on the United States significantly. If United States cancels trade with China, China will have serious issues with survival. If United States decides not to purchase Chinese goods, it will be somewhat rough, but they'll figure it out. But for China, that'll be the end of it if the United States stops trade with them. That's why China is totally dependent upon the United States. And Americans were creating this situation on purpose, despite all these tariffs and all that squabble. China needs United States much more than United States need China. This is a very asymmetric situation, and it was built as such by United States, and they're using it with pleasure. And military opposition to the United States, China is definitely not ready for that, and not going for this, in my view. It's interesting that another deal worked for Trump with Taiwan. Oh yeah, 11 billion worth of weapons were deployed to Taiwan. China started military exercises immediately. Yeah, they both keep threatening each other and brandishing arms, but they do understand that attacking Taiwan means direct hot war with the United States. I do not see them doing it. Do you think that United States geopolitically then ties Russia and China together by these actions? Yes, United States somewhat are pushing Russia, indeed, into the arms of China, because if there will be no Venezuelan oil available, it probably will be Russian oil that will replace it. But how will that cooperation work exactly? That's still a big question. Now, do you think Americans have no more chances to create huge problems for Russia? What do you mean? Well, like the law, that the bill proposed by Graham for 5 times sanctions for everybody who purchases Russian oil products. And if China is caught red-handed purchasing at different prices from Russia, then financial tools may be implemented against China, which will be quite a catastrophe for China, even if they figure out some ways to evade it. So, as I did talk before about the Global South and Global South trying to put the pedal to the floor to try to expedite their organization and development of it, United States still has enough power to resist. Maybe 10 years from now, situation will change. Right now, the Global South is still weak. I think United States was somewhat at a loss initially. We're not sure where to go, how to pursue. But once they figure out what their objectives are, they can create very significant ripples in this water. They can affect the whole course of this ship if they want to. And look, in order to avoid financial sanctions by the United States, countries would need to create significant, working, effective financial system. And there were many attempts. There were many attempts at digital currency. Taiwan did something. But so far, economically successful, it was not. It is just somewhat at the nascent stages, especially now trying to switch to some new system when, if United States will start affecting financial calculations and relations between China, Russia, and their partners. This whole world, however you spin it, is still sitting on dollar. Ocean trade is controlled by Americans, and that means 70% of world trade. Silk Road China was building is not so simple. And how do you rebel against the United States? How do you move against them? It's very complex. So yes, they can affect the situation, the economic situation with Russia and China more. And it appears that Venezuela is just the first step. And I guess at some point, Donald decided to answer the threats that he heard from Russia, China, and other foes. So it's interesting, Alexey, that Trump's strategy is not getting too much analytics on a global level. What is he going towards? There is a lot of criticism. Everything is presented as chaotic and not related. Mexico, Cuba, Greenland, Canada is concerned. Africans are concerned. And some African countries are declaring that they will switch to yuan as a backup currency. But the paradox is that everybody is still running towards gold and silver. Before attacks on Iran, the dollar fortifies. Now, the other trend is present. Trump says that he will bring his own appointee for Federal Reserve Commission from BlackRock, fella who is in charge of global investments there. He is meeting with businesses over Venezuela, but he cannot really give them any good deal because people with calculations are telling that it'll take them some time, at least a couple of years, to get some results out of it. So Trump's action is actually fast, right? They picked Maduro in days, but whatever else will be done requires a couple of years of stabilization and continuous work to bring any fruit. So we keep hearing that Trump is about new imperialism, new empire. What do you think he wants to see at the end? Is there a coherent picture in his mind? Well, I think I understand what he intends to achieve. Of course, a very high-tech United States with a lot of support by AI, where they are rather successful in developing that technology. There was, of course, a space program as a part of America being strong in the future. And even despite all the controversy around NASA's budget, they kept a big chunk of it, so they're still developing their space programs. The United States also is putting a target on proxy regimes managed by Russia and China in different countries and affecting those regimes. And you can understand their key goals is to control sea trade, ocean trade, control the global security to some degree, and to affect new rules of the gameplay, whether it will be a digital dollar or some other things that will be implemented. I'm not too big of an expert in the economic side of it, but there is a system of international payments. For now, it is based on dollar, and in some fashion it will remain, whether it will be a dollar or digital dollar, some gold backup, digital currency. There is still going to be some backup global payment system. And I can guarantee that after a couple different turns and things moving globally, you can find that America is still at control of that global system. So they have too many levers of control in their hands. Trade, physical trade, trade routes, monetary levers. And they will use it. They will exercise this influence. And of course, they are declaring that, yes, you can somewhat trade with the Western Hemisphere, with our blessing, but America is not relinquishing its control on the global financial systems. All right, Alexey, one more thing about Trump, and then we'll move towards Europe. But this one is important. Just recently, maybe 10 minutes ago, Trump posted another post on his Truth Social, where he comments on the decision of Supreme Court on the tariffs. Verbatim, the actual numbers that we would have to pay back if for any reason the Supreme Court were to rule against the United States of America on tariffs would be many hundreds of billions of dollars. And that does not even include the amount of payback that countries and companies would require for the investments they are making on building plants, factories, and equipment for the purpose of being able to avoid the payment of tariffs. When these investments are added, we're talking about trillions of dollars. It would be a complete mess and almost impossible for our country to pay. Anybody who says that it can be quickly and easily done would be making a false, inaccurate, or totally misunderstood answer to this very large and complex question. It may not be possible, but if it were, it would be dollars that would be so large that it would take many years to figure out what number we are talking about and even who, when, and where to pay. Remember, when America shines brightly, the world shines brightly. In other words, if Supreme Court rules against the United States of America on this national security bonanza, we are screwed. So, Alexei, Trump, with all this opposition inside the United States, is he teetering on the brink, or is he just making it look like? Well, it is hard to give an answer to that, whether it is a real brink or not, because America is already earning billions of dollars on these tariffs. To some degree, he is aimed at breaking the system, and that globalist-driven gray system that is not easily affected even by elected politicians. Nobody knows how it will end. Trump may prevail, or maybe the swamp prevails. We can understand both sides and their interests, but it's very difficult to give prognostications here. We will have several important milestones: the decision of the Supreme Court on the tariffs. Second, how will Supreme Court decide, how will they rule if the states vote against the decisions of Supreme Court, specifically for the illegal immigrants matters, as some states are protesting it. And essentially Trump is trying to rebuild the machine that creates global income for globalists. And there are a lot of financial interests. So whether it will fall into the abyss and or whether it will prevail over Trump, we don't know yet. We will see. Okay, Alexei, in Europe, nobody talks about Russian Oreshnik strike. Some people are saying that this is a signal to NATO to stop supporting Ukraine. What do you think about this strike? There are some notes from Russia, official statements that they were trying to hit the Air Force repair facility where F-16s are getting refitted. Do you think it was worth it? Do you think they just wasted it? Okay, so first, the effectivity of that specific strike is measured as low. There are statements that Oreshnik is not really an effective weapon, and nobody will fret much because of just one single strike by that missile, unless they are some influencers and some other online people or other leaders of opinion who are trying to drum things up. So the effectivity of this strike was low. Whether indeed they've missed accidentally or on purpose, don't know. Again, these warheads were not equipped with nuclear parts. They were just kinetic warheads. Of course, if it strikes your facility at 13,000 kilometers an hour, it can destroy. But is it enough to scare the whole NATO into stopping supplies of armaments to Ukraine? Even if it would be equipped with nuclear warheads, I don't think this will dissuade NATO from supporting Ukraine. And again, could you use different warheads on Oreshnik? Good question. Maybe it's a technical limitations. Maybe it can only carry nuclear warheads, because it's the second strike of Oreshnik, and in both strikes it was used as kinetic weapon. Is it scary for NATO? I don't see it. It is a strategic armament that was used twice, one on Lvov, one on this repair facility. Both strikes pose questions about the effectivity of this weapon. One cannot say that this is minimal. One can neither say that this is overwhelming. As a matter of fact, it stopped scaring people with its fleur of mystery. People are not too afraid of it. You see two uses, and the legend about scary Oreshnik is getting washed away. It causes certain concerns with specialists and with usual citizens, so it doesn't look like it's too scary of a weapon. That's why I don't see it producing any result, any effect on NATO at large. It might produce an effect on the factory itself if it hits right. There were concerns about Russians using Oreshnik on the presidential quarters in Kiev, but I think United States affected that decision by Putin to shift the target to a different place, because otherwise it could disrupt the negotiations process. So do you think we'll see Oreshnik more often, Alexei? Oh, no, well, nobody knows how many of them they have. If we get another one with 36 warheads, Putin doesn't really have too many targets, right? If there are 16 splitting warheads, you have to pick the right target for that. It's more effective to use Kinzhal. That is actually more precise as well. There are not too many targets, too many clusters of targets where you can have 16 targets around it for all the warheads. So it implies some constraints on where do you use it. Most likely they're not going to use it against the city, because it will be any of the cities in Ukraine. It will likely cause a lot of pushback in the United States, and Russia is still in the peace process. That's why, while they're still negotiating, they likely will not escalate to use it on the living quarters. Living on the non-living facilities or attacking non-living facilities, sure, they attacked factories, they destroyed some, but they have not fully demolished them. So, yeah, they can use it as, again, testing purposes in actual wartime, maybe propaganda, but the real effectiveness is not too scary. All right, Alexei, so if Ukraine is not afraid of Oreshnik, there were rumors about some other missile that is being tested in different conditions, and publications are talking about, some of them are talking about super precise or super deadly. One can pose the question here, though. Have we stepped over a certain next escalation step, or we're still at the moment where we just lift our foot? Well, there's no escalation, as I see it, Alexander. In order to escalate, you need to disrupt the peace communication. For now, everything works. And that's why I don't see escalation happening. Now, if peace process will fall apart, then everybody will likely play in the style of, okay, now we'll show you how it actually works, and they might attack civilian targets. So you think that peace process is not off? No, of course not. Medvedev is writing posts, Witkov is traveling, Trump and Putin are commenting, Zelensky is commenting on it. So there's a lot of things happening. Well, the war is also happening regardless of all that activity, Alexei. Kuleba posted today, Lapata Man, as they call him, for a shovel man, when he said that Ukrainians will fight with shovels if they're out of arms. He's giving interviews as the possible candidate for the Foreign Intelligence Service, saying that Ukrainians generally are not against giving up some territory, and they're looking into somehow finishing this war. However, it seems like the whole 2026, the war will continue. Right, Alexander. He also names the reason for that, because he's stating that Russia thinks they can achieve their goals militarily, and Ukraine thinks they can prevent Russia from achieving these goals, and that's the basis for his statements, which are quite reasonable statements. But I don't think we are at the threshold of escalation. This actually sounds rather cynical, Alexei, given that people have frozen apartments in Kiev, there is no electricity, there are massive disconnects with electricity throughout the country. Right, Dnepr, Kryvyi Rog, a bunch of other cities lost power. But one can ask a question whether Russia is the first country that creates significant issues to civilian population by destroying the infrastructure. No, NATO was doing that in Yugoslavia, for example. Then, do you think using climate conditions to create inhumane life conditions for civilians? This is a big question for international law, whether using climate to affect civilians is somewhat punishable. Why is it is done? Of course, it's reasonably understood that this is pushing Ukraine to a peace process, right? And Ukraine doesn't want to go and just surrender. Yes, Russia, absolutely consciously using severe cold winter, using difficult climate conditions, is pushing Kiev and Zelensky government to concede and trying to create that situation in Ukraine to escalate the resistance or upset by civilian population with their president because of the life they have without electricity. So do you think it'll be effective? Depends. You need to, first of all, probably measure public opinion before the infrastructure was destroyed and then after that infrastructure was affected by military strikes. And then you can poll them about whether they want to continue this war and what terms would be to continue this war or stop this war. We don't know the answer to these questions. Ukrainian official media will, of course, show the unity, love to Zelensky, and readiness to fight with shovels and till 3,445, till the last part of very eastern Russia is liberated from Russia. Who else can do that? The West can do some social polling, but they usually do not publish it officially because that's considered to be intervention into the inner affairs of Ukraine. Maybe Trump can mention some results of it in some of his speeches or addresses. I know that these pollings do happen, but nobody is using them as official data. And I would caution from making judgment by talking to select few that you know in Ukraine, because that would technically you'll be doing a polling in a bubble. Logically, sure, there'll be some percent of people shifting towards finishing this war as a result of living in these inhumane conditions. But I think the percent of those who don't want this war to continue is already pretty big. The problem Ukraine has is that small group of people holding power, propped up by, how they called by Sergei Datsyuk, national patriots. They're basically holding a country hostage, holding everybody who wants to stop the war hostage to their efforts to prevent Russia from succeeding. So, okay. You think they do hold him hostage, right? I understand that there probably is no power ready to topple Zelensky right now in Ukraine, but there is an interesting process that is actually happening amongst his inner circles and those who are around him. Zelensky is continuously shifting everybody for everybody. He's changing the heads of regional administrations. He has some issues with voting about Maluk in Congress, but he's replacing ministers. He announced today in the evening message, we already were streaming live, when he was announcing new decrees that more people are getting shifted. And many people think that what is wrong in his vertical of power that would make him to make so many concerned moves. And we're not only talking about the power agencies, where everybody talks that, okay, there is some Yermak's legacy. He's actually talking about districts, about different parts of Ukraine. Is he afraid of something? I think there are two obvious reasons. First of all, to maintain the manageability and control of Ukraine, because if he loses control, the matter of his political power and survival comes to play. So he tries to keep that all glued together coherently. And second is probably elections, because the task of governors, and it's not a secret, it's to give a certain percent at the elections. That's the key thing demanded from them, basically, in his government. So this is one of the signs of him getting ready to elections, I think, in some reasonable time frame, probably within a year. Okay, within a year, we are also seeing some ratings that indicate that Zelensky is not a player. They even drew, yeah, right, they drew 1.6% of support to myself, so I was laughing. This is laughable when somebody who is sanctioned and called a Russian spy by Zelensky government has a 1.6%. This is a rather humorous situation that keeps me laughing. Actually, even more than the acting mayor of the capital, who is talking a lot of funny things about Ukraine. So what's wrong with Ukrainians, Alexey? They are somewhat freedom-loving, right? They do have all the right values. And I did talk about that episode before. They would show us, for example, an amputee in a hospital who lost a leg and two arms, and he's giving an interview to one of the TV stations. And that serviceman is saying that, answering the question, why did we fight so well in 22? Because we were afraid to die in shackles. We need to die, well, for freedom. And why Ukraine is not so effective now? His answer is because we're not getting hit too much. You really think that? Well, no, Alexander. I think we've had two wars. The first war lasted for about 50 days. It was a just war. The whole world supported us. We all stood up like one and pushed back. It was a fight for freedom of a country that did not provoke that attack, if not in actions of its political leadership, but the general population has not provoked that. And they went out to defend their homeland. Now, when the time came for Istanbul agreements, there slowly was a switch to another war, from freedom against tyranny to the warriors of light against the genetic garbage. And that one did not quite fly. And the more this language is going to be played, the less successful will be. Because when you fight for freedom against oppression, that elevates your self-esteem, that elevates you as a person. But when you're called the warrior of light, at the same time you're being shoved into the bus while being drafted, you're beaten, your rights are being taken away, there is a big incongruency there. So I think there was a huge mistake made by Ukrainian political leadership. That's one. Second, it was probably unavoidable because strategic bet on monoculturalism and separation as much as they can from anything Russian would not allow them to create a different structure. So, Alexey, do you think we can change the course of this war? What do you mean? We can, of course, say that, yes, we are fighting for freedom against tyranny, but for that we need to implement or return our freedoms back. Because for now we have, for example, a huge amount of prosecution against the pastors of Moscow Patriarchy, Orthodox Church in Ukraine, to such a degree that Anna Paulina Luna and other congressmen from states are asking questions. What are you doing? And Stefanishin is making clumsy excuses. There were a lot of criminal activities happening with the Moscow representatives of the Moscow Church. To which Bondarenko retorts rather creatively, saying that, look, Stalin also was prosecuting thousands of priests. Is that because they were criminals or other reasons? So if suddenly Ukrainian leadership would have changed their course and would have started to reinstate democracy against tyranny program, I think we would have more volunteers coming back to the front. We would even have some Ukrainians coming back and to the country, and we would have more sympathy of the global community. Because right now, if you close two folders and hide the names, you probably will have issues, just two sets of folders of facts of oppression. You'd probably be hard-pressed to figure out which country is which. No, Alexei, I will retort here, say that I think you can understand where Russia is and where Ukraine is. Maidan, city center. Stop, you, dumb fuck. That's the commentary behind the screen. And continuing saying, you will be the next one. Take a picture of him, make him known. So this was, they were accused of being traitors, those who did not stop for the cortege. They were, there was a procession to bury a dead military serviceman. Somebody didn't stop. So yeah, the only way to stop all that, Alexander, I think, is to change our political course. But everything is so discredited already that you would have to prove that you are changing this course. And Zelensky, I don't think, is a figure who can do it. He came on these promises, but he utterly failed. And if he looks for somebody to replace figures in the ministries, I don't think he will be able to change the course. This train is heading to the abyss. There are theoretical, hypothetical options, but realistically, they are not present. and organizationally they're not present, not until elections. So Zelensky is leading Ukraine into the wall, and there is a big abyss behind that wall. How long will be the fall, we'll see. It's difficult to estimate it at the moment, but one can say that continuation of the political project of anti-Russia and monocultural nationalism is destroying Ukraine and will likely bring us not only to political defeat, but also to historical defeat in a very short time frame, probably within a decade. All right, another one. Kirill Budanov, he doesn't write too much on his Telegram channel. Maybe Yusuf, maybe his second in command, is writing that today is the day of Ukrainian political prisoner. We remember all those who suffered for our right to speak freely and think freely. From imprisonment of Taras Shevchenko by Russian Empire to the Soviet times camps and Ukrainian intelligentsia, which was sent there to stifle the freedom of thought in the country. The names of regimes change, the methods remain the same. Prison as the instrument of Moscow politics against Ukrainians, and Ukrainians are being prosecuted for their identity together with prisoners of war. Today we're thinking not only about those who are behind bars, we're thinking about their families, about the wives and relatives who are waiting for them. We remember every political prisoner, we're fighting for them, and we'll do everything to bring them back home to the country. Alexey, so you and I are sanctioned by Ukrainian government. A lot of people in Ukraine are imprisoned for communicating with people from those territories where the Ukrainians are being prosecuted. We are also Ukrainians, right? Or our people who are sanctioned and who are imprisoned in Ukraine, are they also political prisoners? Oh, no, Alexander, they are the enemies of the state, right? There is a proper Ukrainian political prisoner, and then there is an improper one. You and I are improper. We do not fit the frame. I do not want to comment the texts which are written on such a degree of subconsciousness, because I don't think anybody was conscious when they were writing it. But they are targeting a very narrow group of populace who will not think while reading it. But you and I know that in Ukraine there are from 32 to 35,000 political prisoners who are imprisoned for expressing certain political views. Let me emphasize that question that you asked. Do we think that this day is also celebrating these people? Or then should we perhaps name them differently, and we should name the day of political prisoners, like foreign political prisoners, maybe external political prisoners, and name internal political prisoners as something else, because they are not proper. You see, this rhetoric is very offensive to your own people, because the authors of this rhetoric imply that Ukrainians are completely brainless. And I hope this is not so. Some people still have some. Especially, bringing up Taras Shevchenko as political prisoner, who was bought out of indentured servitude by essentially the Russian Empress. Karl Brylov, a well-known painter of the time, drew a portrait of a poet, Vasily Zhukovsky, and Empress purchased it at the auction. And then these money were transferred and paid to the owner of Taras Shevchenko, Pavel Engelgard, and he set him free. Yet Taras Shevchenko wrote a rather upsetting poem about the Empress, which was a significant violation at the time. And he was also forgiven for his political activity that was disrupting collective system of security in Russia at that time. So Budanov will, of course, avoid writing about that. This is too complex for his writings. Well, another post of a funny regime that is trying to fight with Bulgakov and other literary figures. And for 2 years, meantime, people are living without electricity, without heat, with non-working sewage. Do you think Alexey Budanov will solve the problem of mobilization and draft and people leaving the disposition of their military detachments? No, you need to change the principles. You need to change the attitude to people. You need to change how people are drafted, how people are trained. He's there to enforce. He is not there to change. There'll be a lot of campaigns, there'll be a lot of good stories in the media. Budanov is rather well known for organizing campaign. I would ask our viewers to look into what Arty Green is publishing. And from what he's writing, I'm seeing different nuanced things about heroic past of Budanov. And in quotes, it matches what I have about Budanov. So yeah, pay attention to Arty's posts and to the system that he will create. You know my attitude to that. You know that military intel became special machine for Zelensky's to get profits, if not half criminal, then very strongly criminal, like 48% criminal. So in reality, real military intel drowned in all that criminality, except for some of the remaining good people there who achieved a couple of things during this war. But if you think with the new figure on top of it, the ministry will change, I think this is false hope. So you think there is nobody to do it, right, Alexey? Who can be in that system, Alexander, if they are moving the same 5 beds in the same brothel? And Kuleba, after making a lot of statements, some of which were much more accusatory than even what we are talking about here, and then Zelensky is trying to bring him back, that means that his roster is very short. He doesn't have many people to rely on. And it's not a secret, Ukraine is a small village. Many people whom we know directly or who is a friend of our good friend, many of them were offered a lot of positions. Vice Prime Minister, Minister of different branches of power. People are refusing, they don't want to participate in this regime. So however much you paint the decoration with great achievements and future super campaigns, how much pictures of important meetings, anti-corruption meetings, and changing the draft process meetings, you need to really change system in order to change it. You cannot get by with just posts and media. Current system is very simple. In the peacetime, they're making money. In the war times, they're making money on the blood of their citizens and turn the blood into golden toilets. That's it. End of the first hour.